The roast beef was perfectly sliced. The crystal glasses gleamed, and the silence in the dining room was deafening. I had just dropped the bomb. I was pregnant. My father wiped his mouth, stood up, and coldly erased me from his life. But then, the doorbell rang. The mahogany dining table in the Mitchell family's Connecticut estate was long enough to seat 12, but on this particular Tuesday evening, it held only 3 people. The distance between us, however, felt like miles. I stared down at my plate, my appetite entirely non-existent. At 22, I was supposed to be the golden child of the Mitchell dynasty. I had recently graduated with honors from an Ivy League university, my future meticulously charted by my parents, Arthur and Beverly. Arthur, a senior executive at Vanguard Holdings, was months away from a highly anticipated CEO promotion. Beverly, a prominent figure in the local country club and philanthropic circuits, treated our family's public image with the ruthless precision of a military general. But sitting in my designer handbag, currently resting on the floor beside my chair, was a plastic stick with 2 glaring pink lines. It was a secret I had carried for 3 agonizing days, a secret that was about to shatter the porcelain facade of my parents' perfect world. The father was Lars. Lars Davies was a hard-working assistant manager at a local hardware store who was studying at night to become a structural engineer. He was kind, fiercely loyal, and drove a beat-up Honda Civic with a sputtering muffler. In Arthur Mitchell's eyes, Lars was nothing short of a parasite, a blue-collar distraction who had no place in the Mitchell family tree. "You're awfully quiet tonight, Christina," Beverly noted, her tone less concerned and more accusatory. She took a delicate sip of her Cabernet. "If this is about that Davies boy again, I thought we made it clear that your association with him was to end upon graduation." My heart hammered against my ribs. The heavy ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to amplify the tension in the room. I looked up, my hands trembling so violently I had to press them flat against my thighs under the table. "It's not about Lars." "Well, it is, but—" I swallowed hard, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Mom, Dad, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen before you react." Arthur paused, his steak knife hovering over his medium-rare beef Wellington. He fixed me with a stare that was famously known in boardrooms for making grown men sweat. "Spit it out, Christina. I have a 9 o'clock conference call with Tokyo, and I don't have the patience for riddles." "I'm pregnant," I said. The words slipped out fast, a desperate exhale. For a span of perhaps 10 seconds, the world stopped spinning. The silence that fell over the dining room was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. Beverly's wineglass stopped halfway to her lips, her eyes widening in a mixture of horror and disbelief. Arthur didn't move a muscle. He simply stared at me, his face draining of color before flushing a deep, dangerous crimson. "You are what?" Arthur's voice was dangerously low, a whisper that carried more menace than a shout. "I'm pregnant," I repeated, my voice cracking. "I'm 9 weeks along. Lars and we're going to keep the baby. We're going to figure it out." Beverly set her glass down with a sharp clink. "Figure it out? Figure it out?" she hissed, her pristine composure finally cracking. "You are 22 years old. Your father is about to be named CEO. Do you have any idea what a scandal like this will do to us? A bastard child with a hardware clerk? He's going to be an engineer, Mom, and we love each other." "Love?" Arthur interrupted, his voice booming as he suddenly pushed his chair back and stood up. The heavy chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. "You think this is about love? This is about legacy, Christina. This is about the name I have spent 30 years building. You have thrown your entire life away for a moment of stupidity with a man who will never amount to anything." "Dad, please," I begged, hot tears finally spilling over my eyelashes and tracking down my cheeks. "I'm still your daughter. I need your help. I need your support." Arthur threw his linen napkin onto his half-eaten meal. He walked around the table, stopping just a few feet from where I sat frozen in my chair. He looked down at me not with anger, but with a cold, terrifying detachment that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. "No," Arthur said evenly. You were my daughter. My daughter was a bright, respectable young woman bound for law school and a suitable marriage. The person sitting in front of me is a liability. A stranger? I gasped. The air knocked out of my lungs. You can't mean that. I have never meant anything more in my life, Arthur replied. He turned his back on me. You have exactly 1 hour to pack whatever fits into 2 suitcases. Leave the keys to the Mercedes on the entryway table. I will cancel your credit cards by midnight. You will not contact your mother. And you will not contact me. As of tonight, Christina, you are completely on your own. Beverly didn't say a word. She simply stared out the dark window, refusing to even look at her daughter. Sobbing, I stumbled out of the dining room. I practically ran up the grand sweeping staircase to my bedroom. Panic and heartbreak fueled my movements as I threw clothes, my laptop, and whatever cash I had hidden in my vanity into a duffel bag and a rolling suitcase. When I dragged my bags down the stairs 45 minutes later, the house was completely silent. My parents had vanished into the West Wing. They hadn't even stayed to watch me leave. I stepped out the heavy front doors into a sudden, driving rainstorm. I pulled out my phone and dialed the only person I had left. 20 minutes later, Lars's beat-up Honda pulled through the grand iron gates. When he saw me standing in the rain, soaked to the bone and shivering next to my luggage, he rushed out, wrapped his coat around me, and held me as I broke down completely. The Mitchell estate faded into the rearview mirror, lost in the rain and the dark. I had nothing left but the clothes in my bags, the man driving the car, and the tiny life growing inside me. 3 weeks later, the opulent grandeur of the Mitchell estate felt like a hallucination. I was now living in Lars's tiny, drafty, one-bedroom apartment on the industrial outskirts of Boston. The walls were thin, the paint was peeling in the bathroom, and the radiator clanked loudly in the middle of the night. It was a far cry from Egyptian cotton sheets and private chefs, but it was safe. Lars had been a rock. He took on overtime shifts at the hardware store, waking up at 5 in the morning and returning long after the sun had set. Utterly exhausted. Despite his fatigue, he never complained. He brought me saltines and ginger ale for my morning sickness and rubbed my back while I cried over the brutal rejection of my family. But the financial reality was grim. My bank accounts had been frozen exactly as Arthur promised. I was applying for entry-level jobs, but the morning sickness was severe, leaving me tethered to the bathroom for hours each day. The stress was eating away at me. I felt like a massive burden on Lars, entirely responsible for dragging him into a life of poverty and struggle. It was a gloomy Thursday afternoon. Lars was at work, and I was sitting on the sagging thrift store sofa, wrapped in an oversized fleece blanket, staring blankly at a muted daytime television show. I was trying to calculate how many meals we could squeeze out of a bag of rice and a few cans of black beans when a sharp, authoritative knock echoed through the small apartment. I jumped. Nobody ever knocked on our door. The mail carrier simply dropped letters in the lobby boxes, and we certainly couldn't afford food delivery. I tightened the blanket around my shoulders and approached the door, looking through the scratched peephole. Standing in the dimly lit hallway was a man who looked entirely out of place in our rundown building. He was in his late 40s, impeccably dressed in a bespoke charcoal grey suit, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. He didn't look like a bill collector, and he certainly wasn't a neighbour. Hesitantly, I undid the deadbolt and opened the door a few inches, keeping the chain engaged. Yes? Can I help you? Christina Mitchell? The man asked. His voice was smooth, professional, and completely calm. Yes. Who are you? My name is Harrison Caldwell. I am a senior partner at Caldwell, Sterling and Associates, he said, reaching into his breast pocket to produce a thick, embossed business card, which he slipped through the crack in the door. I apologize for the unannounced intrusion, Miss Mitchell. I've had quite a difficult time tracking you down. Your father went to great lengths to erase your current address from any public record. Hearing my father's mention made my blood run cold. I gripped the edge of the door. If Arthur sent you to give me some kind of hush-money contract or a non-disclosure agreement, you can tell him to go to hell. I don't want his money. And I'm not signing anything. Harrison Caldwell offered a small, knowing smile. Miss Mitchell, I can assure you, Arthur Mitchell did not send me. In fact, if your father knew I was standing in this hallway right now, he would likely have a heart attack. I frowned, my curiosity momentarily overpowering my defensive instincts. Then who do you represent? I represent the estate of your late grandfather, Silas Mitchell, Caldwell said quietly. May I please come in? What we need to discuss is highly confidential, and it directly concerns the child you are carrying. My breath hitched. My grandfather, Silas, had passed away 6 years ago. He was the founder of Vanguard Holdings, a ruthless but brilliant businessman who had built the family empire from the ground up. He had always been stern, but he had a soft spot for me, often letting me sit in his massive leather office chair when I was a little girl. Slowly, I unlatched the chain and opened the door. Caldwell stepped inside, taking in the cramped, damp surroundings without a single trace of judgment on his face. He waited until I had locked the door before taking a seat on a rickety wooden dining chair, placing his briefcase on his lap. I'll get straight to the point, Miss Mitchell, as I know this must be overwhelming, Caldwell began, popping the golden clasps of his briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents tied with a red ribbon. When Silas Mitchell passed away, he left the bulk of his estate, the Connecticut mansion, the liquid assets, and a 62% controlling stake in Vanguard Holdings in a heavily structured trust. I know, I said, confused. My dad manages the trust. Arthur manages the trust, yes, Caldwell corrected, his eyes locking onto mine. But he does not own it. Arthur is merely the executor and the steward. Your grandfather was deeply disillusioned with your father's obsession with high society and corporate politics. Silas wanted the Mitchell wealth to skip a generation. Caldwell flipped open the top folder, pointing to a highlighted section of dense legal text. Silas included a very specific, irrevocable stipulation in his will, known as the legacy clause. It dictates that the absolute ownership of the trust, all the assets, the properties, and the controlling shares of the company automatically transfers to the very first biological great-grandchild of Silas Mitchell, the moment that child is confirmed to be conceived. I stared at the lawyer, my mind struggling to process the words. Conceived? I mean, Caldwell said, leaning forward, that the moment you became pregnant, Arthur Mitchell legally lost everything. By law, the entire Mitchell empire now belongs to your unborn child, and until that child turns 21, you, as the mother, are the sole legal guardian and conservator of the estate. The room started to spin. I grabbed the arm of the sofa to steady myself. Wait, my dad. He kicked me out because I embarrassed him. Because of Lars. Harrison Caldwell's expression hardened into one of profound professional disgust. Miss Mitchell, your father didn't disown you out of shame. He disowned you out of panic. He found out about your pregnancy through a private investigator he hired to follow you months ago. He kicked you out and cut you off to completely isolate you, hoping you would terminate the pregnancy out of financial desperation before the board of directors. And my law firm found out. Caldwell stood up, holding out a silver pen to me. Your father isn't trying to protect his reputation, Christina. He is actively trying to steal your child's inheritance, and I am here to help you take it all back. I stared at the polished silver pen in Harrison Caldwell's outstretched hand. The metallic surface caught the dim light of the apartment's single living room lamp, reflecting a distorted image of my own pale, terrified face. Steal my child's inheritance, I repeated, the words tasting foreign and metallic on my tongue. My father threw me out into a rainstorm because he wanted to maintain control of a company? Over $3 billion in assets, Miss Mitchell, Caldwell said, his voice steady and devoid of judgment. Your father has spent the last 6 years treating Vanguard Holdings as his personal fiefdom, but Silas Mitchell was no fool. He knew Arthur lacked the moral compass to shepherd the family's true legacy. Your father's impending promotion to CEO was contingent on the trust remaining dormant. Your pregnancy triggered a catastrophic countdown for him. Slowly, I reached out and took the pen. The sheer, calculated cruelty of my parents' actions washed over me, replacing my sorrow with a hot, glowing ember of rage. They hadn't disowned me out of disappointment. They had executed a preemptive, financial assassination. I signed the retainer agreement, the ink flowing dark and permanent across the heavy cotton paper. Just as Caldwell slipped the documents back into his leather briefcase, the deadbolt clicked. The door swung open to reveal Lars. He was clad in his grease-stained work boots and a faded canvas jacket, holding a plastic grocery bag containing 2 boxes of generic macaroni and cheese. He froze, his blue eyes darting from me, who was clutching a thick stack of legal files, to the impeccably dressed older man sitting on our sagging sofa. "Christina?" Lars asked, setting the groceries on the counter with a heavy thud. "What's going on? Who is this?" "Lars," I said, my voice shaking but finding a new strength. "This is Harrison Caldwell. He's my grandfather's estate lawyer, and he just explained why my parents really kicked me out." For the next hour, Lars sat beside me, his jaw ticking as Caldwell laid out the ruthless mechanics of Arthur Mitchell's deception. Lars didn't care about the billions, the mansions, or the corporate stakes. What made his hands curl into white-knuckled fists was the realization that Arthur had deliberately tried to push me into a state of destitution, gambling that the physical and emotional toll would force me to terminate the pregnancy. "So, what's the play, Mr. Caldwell?" Lars asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Because right now, I have half a mind to drive to Connecticut and drag Arthur out of that mansion by his collar. While I appreciate the sentiment, Mr. Davies, physical retaliation will only play into Arthur's hands," Caldwell replied, adjusting his glasses. "We strike where it actually hurts him, the boardroom. But we must be meticulous. Arthur has deep pockets and powerful friends. Tomorrow morning, I am sending a private, board-certified physician to conduct a formal ultrasound and DNA collection, establishing an undeniable medical record of the pregnancy and your paternity. Once we have that, I file a sealed injunction in federal court to freeze Arthur's access to the Vanguard Trust." The plan was set in motion, but Arthur Mitchell was a man who did not wait for the axe to fall. 2 days later, Lars was working the closing shift at the hardware store. The aisles were empty, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. As he was locking up the power tools section, a man stepped out from the shadows of the plumbing aisle. He was built like a heavyweight boxer but wore a sharp, tailored navy suit. "Lars Davies," the man said. It wasn't a question. Lars tightened his grip on the heavy set of master keys in his hand. "Store's closed, pal. Registers are locked. I'm not here for a hammer," the man said smoothly, pulling a crisp white envelope from his inner jacket pocket and tossing it onto the glass display counter. "My name is Gregory Finch. I represent Arthur Mitchell. Inside that envelope is a cashier's check for $500,000. Made out to you." Lars stared at the envelope, his heart pounding against his ribs. $500,000. It was more money than he could comprehend. It was a house, a college degree, a life free of debt. "Arthur is a reasonable man," Finch continued, taking a step closer. "He recognizes that this situation has become complicated. He wants to offer you a head start. Take the check. Pack your bags tonight. Move to California. Buy a house. Finish your engineering degree. All you have to do is walk away from Christina and sign a document relinquishing all parental rights." Lars looked at the envelope, then slowly met Finch's gaze. A cold smile spread across Lars's face. "Tell Arthur," Lars said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper, "that he doesn't have enough zeros in his bank account to buy my family, and tell him to start packing his own bags." Lars left the envelope on the counter, turned his back on Finch, and walked out the front doors. As soon as he was in his beat-up Civic, his hands started to shake. He pulled out his phone and dialed Harrison Caldwell. "Mr. Caldwell?" Lars breathed, starting the engine. "Arthur just tried to buy me off." Finch. Gregory Finch was the name. Over the speaker, Caldwell let out a dark, satisfied chuckle. "Excellent, Lars. Arthur is panicking. He's making sloppy mistakes. And a man making sloppy mistakes in the corporate world is a man about to lose his crown." The following Tuesday, The 64th floor of the Vanguard Holdings Tower in downtown Manhattan buzzed with the hushed, electric energy of impending power. The executive boardroom, encased in floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the city skyline, was prepared for a coronation. Arthur Mitchell stood at the head of the massive obsidian conference table. He was in his element, exuding the arrogant confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. Seated around the table were the 12 members of the Vanguard Board of Directors, a collection of industry titans, including Richard Hayes, the cynical chief financial officer, and Sylvia DuPont, the ruthless head of international acquisitions. To Arthur's right sat Beverly. She wore a pristine white Chanel suit, her face a mask of serene, aristocratic triumph. Today, the board was voting to officially instate Arthur as CEO, lifting the final contingencies of Silas Mitchell's trust and granting Arthur absolute executive control. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur began, his baritone voice commanding the room, "for 6 years, I have navigated this company through turbulent markets, honoring my father's vision while modernizing our portfolio. Today's vote is not just a transition of titles, it is the cementing of Vanguard's future." Richard Hayes checked his gold Rolex. "We've all read the prospectus, Arthur. Let's dispense with the pageantry and get to the vote. Are there any objections before we ratify the transfer of executive power?" "Actually, Richard, there is one." The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open with a resounding crack. The entire room turned in unison. Standing in the doorway was Harrison Caldwell, his silver hair perfectly combed, his leather briefcase in hand. But it wasn't the lawyer that caused the collective gasp in the room. It was the 2 people flanking him. I stepped into the boardroom. Gone were the oversized fleece blankets and the pale, defeated posture. I wore a tailored black blazer over a simple, elegant maternity dress. My chin was held high, my eyes burning with a fierce, unbreakable resolve. Beside me stood Lars, looking sharp and unyielding in a charcoal suit Caldwell had purchased for him, his hand resting protectively on the small of my back. Arthur's face drained of colour, his jaw slacked, the smooth executive facade shattering instantly. "What is the meaning of this?" "Security! Get these people out of my building." "This is not your building, Arthur," Caldwell said, his voice cutting through the panic like a diamond blade. He walked straight to the table, ignoring Arthur entirely, and began distributing thick, bound legal folders to the board members. "Harrison, what the hell are you doing?" Sylvia DuPont demanded, flipping open the folder dropped in front of her. "I'm executing my fiduciary duty to the estate of Silas Mitchell," Caldwell announced, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "As of 8 a.m. this morning, a federal judge has granted an emergency injunction freezing all of Arthur Mitchell's assets, his access to the Vanguard Trust, and suspending his authority within this company." Chaos erupted. Beverly shot out of her chair, her face flushed with fury. "You can't do this! You have no grounds! Christina, you ungrateful little brat! How dare you show your face here after what you did to this family?" "Sit down, Beverly," I commanded, my voice ringing out with a startling authority that sounded eerily like my late grandfather. The room fell dead silent. Beverly stared at me, genuinely shocked by the iron in my tone. "Sylvia, Richard," Caldwell continued, gesturing to the documents. "If you turn to page 4, you will find a legally certified, board-approved medical affidavit. Miss Christina Mitchell is currently 12 weeks pregnant. According to the irrevocable legacy clause embedded in Silas Mitchell's master trust, a clause Arthur has deliberately hidden from this board for 6 years, the entirety of the estate and the controlling shares of Placecond Vanguard Holdings bypass Arthur entirely upon the conception of Silas's first great-grandchild." Richard Hayes adjusted his reading glasses, his eyes scanning the document rapidly. He looked up, his expression a mix of awe and predatory calculation. "My God! It's ironclad! The shares. They vest immediately to the unborn child, with the mother as the sole conservator." "This is a fraud!" Arthur bellowed, slamming his fists onto the obsidian table. That child is a bastard. He's the son of a hardware clerk. I am the one who built this company. I am the CEO. You are a trespasser, Arthur, Lars spoke up, his voice calm but laced with a lethal edge. He stepped forward, placing a small digital recorder on the table. And you are a coward. You sent a thug named Gregory Finch to offer me $500,000 to abandon Christina and my baby so you could keep your throne. You thought you could starve your own daughter out. You thought you could buy me. Lars pressed play. The crisp, clear audio of Gregory Finch offering the bribe and demanding Lars's disappearance filled the silent boardroom. The blood vanished from Beverly's face. She sank back into her chair, realizing the game was over. The board members exchanged disgusted, horrified glances. Corporate espionage was one thing, but attempting to starve out a pregnant heir and bribe the father was a scandal that would decimate Vanguard's stock if it ever leaked. Arthur, Sylvia DuPont said coldly, closing her folder. You lied to the board. You attempted to defraud the trust, and you have exposed this firm to a catastrophic legal liability. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence. Seconded. Richard Hayes added, without a moment's hesitation, You can't do this! Arthur screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. He looked wildly around the room, finding no allies, no sympathy. Finally, his eyes landed on me. Christina, please. I am your father. I gave you everything. I looked at the man who had thrown me out into the rain, the man who had valued his ego over my life. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt an overwhelming sense of pity for the pathetic, hollow man standing before me. You're right, Arthur, I said quietly, using his first name for the very first time. You did give me everything. You gave me Vanguard Holdings. Now, pack your things. You have exactly 1 hour to leave my building. For a moment, the 64th floor boardroom of Vanguard Holdings was so quiet you could hear the hum of the central air conditioning. Arthur Mitchell stood frozen, his face an ashen mask of utter devastation. The man who had spent 3 decades meticulously crafting an image of absolute power had been dismantled in less than 5 minutes by the daughter he had thrown away. Sylvia DuPont didn't hesitate. She picked up the sleek corporate phone on the conference table and pressed a single button. Security? We need an escort to the executive boardroom immediately. Arthur Mitchell is no longer an employee of this firm. Beverly's perfectly manicured facade shattered. She lunged forward, pushing past Richard Hayes, her Chanel heels clicking frantically against the hardwood floor. She reached out, her hands trembling as she tried to grasp my arm. Christina, darling, please, Beverly pleaded, her voice high-pitched and hysterical. You're acting out of anger. We're your family. We were shocked by the news. We only wanted what was best for you. Let's go home to Connecticut and talk about this over dinner. I stepped back, out of my mother's reach. Lars instantly moved to my side, a silent, immovable barrier between me and the woman who had watched me walk into a rainstorm with nothing. I am home. Beverly, I said, my voice dropping to a frigid, unrecognizable register. And the last time we had dinner, you let my father erase me from your life so you wouldn't be embarrassed at the country club. You don't get to be my mother now just because I hold the checkbook. 2 burly security guards in dark suits stepped into the boardroom. They hesitated for a fraction of a second, recognizing the man they had called boss for years, but Harrison Caldwell gave them a sharp, authoritative nod. They flanked Arthur, who looked completely hollowed out, staring blankly at the mahogany walls. Let's go, Mr. Mitchell, one of the guards said quietly. As Arthur was led out of the glass doors, stripped of his title, his legacy, and his dignity, Beverly let out a choked sob, turned on her heel, and ran after him. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, sealing the couple's fate. The ensuing weeks were a whirlwind of media chaos and corporate restructuring. The story inevitably leaked, landing on the front page of the Wall Street Journal and dominating the morning broadcasts on Bloomberg. The headlines were merciless. Vanguard heir ousts father in shocking boardroom coup. The Connecticut high society circles that Beverly had so desperately clung to turned their backs on her overnight, treating the Mitchells like social pariahs. Christina and Lars, however, had no interest in the spotlight. Guided by Harrison Caldwell, we set to work securing our child's future. But when we brought in the forensic accountants from PricewaterhouseCoopers to conduct a full audit of Vanguard's ledgers, we uncovered the darkest twist of Arthur's reign. It turned out Arthur hadn't just been fighting for the CEO title out of pure ego. He was fighting for survival. Late one evening in Caldwell's downtown office, the lead auditor slid a thick, red-tab dossier across the desk to me. "Your father was hiding a massive hemorrhage, Miss Mitchell," the auditor explained, tapping a page filled with alarming red figures. 3 years ago, Arthur bypassed the board to heavily invest Vanguard capital into a luxury real estate development in Dubai. The project went bankrupt. To cover the margins and hide the losses from the shareholders, he illegally siphoned over $40 million from the company's pension funds into offshore accounts at Credit Suisse. If he had been named CEO, he would have had the unilateral authority to bury the audit forever. I stared at the documents, a cold chill running down my spine. My father wasn't just cruel, he was a white-collar criminal. The realization solidified my resolve. I wasn't just taking my life back, I was saving my grandfather's company from total ruin. With Lars by my side, I made swift, ruthless decisions. I immediately authorized Caldwell to hand the forensic audit over to the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, and the Department of Justice. By Thanksgiving, Arthur Mitchell was formally indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and corporate malfeasance. His assets were seized, forcing him and Beverly to sell the Connecticut estate to pay for a team of federal defense attorneys. They relocated to a small, rented condo in Boca Raton, Florida, their empire completely reduced to ashes. But Lars and I did not move into a mansion. Instead, we purchased a beautiful, historic brownstone in the quiet neighborhood of Beacon Hill in Boston. It had creaky wooden floors, a small garden in the back, and a large, sunlit nursery on the second floor. Lars didn't quit his job at the hardware store right away. He insisted on finishing out his 2 weeks' notice, shaking the manager's hand and thanking him for the opportunity. With the financial backing of the trust, Lars transferred his credits to the prestigious Wentworth Institute of Technology, attending classes during the day to finish his structural engineering degree, and spending his evenings assembling cribs and painting the nursery walls a soft, sage green. I, acting as the sole conservator of the Vanguard Trust, appointed Sylvia DuPont as the interim CEO, choosing to lead from the shadows as the majority shareholder. I didn't want the corner office. I wanted to be a mother. However, I used my newfound power to completely restructure the company's philanthropic wing, quietly funneling millions into community housing projects and vocational scholarships for working-class students programs Lars helped design. 6 months later, on a crisp morning in early April, the true legacy of Silas Mitchell was finally realized. Inside a private suite at Massachusetts General Hospital, the air was filled with a sudden, sharp cry. Lars, wearing a hospital gown and exhausted beyond measure, leaned over the bed with tears streaming down his face. He gently kissed my forehead, my hair damp with sweat, my eyes shining with an overwhelming, fierce love. The nurse wrapped the newborn in a soft flannel blanket and placed him on my chest. The baby had a tuft of dark hair and Lars's bright blue eyes. He was the sole owner of a $3 billion empire. But as I looked down at him, none of the money, the trust funds, or the corporate shares mattered. "He's perfect," Lars whispered, his voice thick with emotion, resting his large, calloused hand over the baby's tiny fingers. "What should we name him?" I asked softly, tracing the curve of my son's cheek. Lars smiled, looking over his shoulder. Standing quietly in the corner of the hospital room, holding a massive bouquet of white lilies, was Harrison Caldwell. The older lawyer offered a warm, respectful nod. "I think," Lars said, turning back to me, "we should name him Silas. Silas Davies." I beamed, a tear escaping my eye and rolling onto the hospital pillow. Silas Davies. It wasn't a Mitchell. It was a new name, a new bloodline, and a new beginning. We had taken the broken pieces of a toxic legacy and built something beautiful, strong, and entirely our own. The cold porcelain of my past was gone, replaced by the warm, unbreakable foundation of a real family.